made a couple of good points here. That what is leadership actually? Like, I think in my eyes, and to a lot of Canadians, leadership unites people no matter what their views are. And you said it right that, they didn't feel like they were being listened to. Yeah, rather they were being vilified for everything that, why they were there. Was a frustration there. I think you and some of our other colleagues did a really good job of listening. You guys went down to the border to listen to some of those concerns. How did those conversations go?
It was we went down to Coots, and we were there probably for 4 or 5 hours talking to the organizers. Toured the blockade, and certainly we were there to voice our concern. We were very upfront. We cannot support blockade of critical infrastructure. This is an important border crossing, certainly on the agriculture side, where feed and livestock is moving across all the time, and other commodities. But it was very respectful. Again, they voiced their frustration. They voiced their anxiety. And again, it just came down to they just did not feel like Prime Minister Trudeau was listening to them. Most of them were farmers and agriculture or truckers. And they said, we're just trying to do our job. And he's making it impossible. And certainly many of the feedlots and the grain companies were just as angry because they couldn't get their products. So, I think the response that we had from them was, thanks for coming. That's now we feel like somebody is at least paying attention and listening and understands. And they started to take that blockade down after we left. And thankfully 2 days later it was done and had nothing to do with the Emergencies Act.
Yeah. Right? Absolutely right. And it was enacted after that when the borders were clearing up. So, it raises a question, like, what was it really there for? Why did they enact it? And, again, in my opinion, to a lot of people, that it comes down to leadership again. Those qualities that a leader must have is to listen, is to unite, is to make sure that everyone is at least, if you don't agree with something, that they can be heard. And what to you should role that Justin Trudeau has as a prime minister, what should he be doing right now, or what should he have done at that time? We talk about listening, but what are some of the other steps that he can take in order to ease some of the tension and the friction that's been built up over many years?
Well, you nailed it, right? It's certainly show that leadership. But when he brought in the Emergencies Act because it was a political crisis, not a democratic crisis or a security crisis. It was a political crisis because he did nothing for 3 weeks, where he should have acted. That first weekend, it should never have gotten to the point where it was. Now, I'm not saying that the Prime Minister maybe walks out of his office at the Langevin block and tours around with the protesters, but you invite the organizers or a few, or at least go on the media and say, hey, I understand you're angry. We're all stressed. We're all frustrated. We understand how you feel. This is our pathway. This is what our metrics are going to be to get things back to normal. But he didn't do any of those things. In fact, like I said, he called them names. We put a motion on the floor asking for a clear path to when the mandates will be lifted and what is needed for those things to happen. They voted that down. In fact, they gave us nothing. And that just further made this get worse and worse and worse.
That's right.
So all they were asking for is, what is the plan? Give us a pathway to the end of this tunnel and we'll go home. That's all he needed to do. But instead, he had a massive abuse of power. Now, I think the biggest thing that we as opposition need to be aware of is the finance ministers also said that their plan is to make some of these provisions of the Emergencies Act permanent when it comes to control over crowdfunding and the ability to freeze bank accounts and assets. That is unacceptable. That is frightening. That is not democracy. And we've seen how Justin Trudeau and his government have been raked over the coals internationally. So it's interesting how the international media is calling him a dictator and all these other names, but our Canadian media supports this action.
That's right.
That's a pretty stark contrast with how we're viewed globally.